Hey everybody, this is Dominic D'Angelo, WrestleZone.com. Today's date is February 25th, 2021, and I'm happy to have with me here none other than Eric Bischoff on behalf of Ad Free Shows. Eric, thanks for joining me, man.
I am very, very happy to be here, Dominic. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, the best. I think you're the owner of the most photogenic dog in wrestling. Let me say that.
Yeah, Nikki is. She's a great looking dog. Photogenic, she's not. It's like she gets in the best poses and the best, backdrops. Everything looks great. As soon as she sees me reaching for my camera, boom, off she's gone.
Out of there. I know.
So, I got to sneak in a good shot every now and then when I can sneak one.
Now, is the weather pretty good for her right now? Is it like considering everything happening with winter and how it's been?
No, it's weather suckage here in Wyoming, brother. It's honestly, I lived in Minneapolis for a long time, and look, it's colder and more miserable in other parts of the country for sure. But the issue that we have up here where I live now, I live high up on a ridge, kind of looking right into Yellowstone National Park in a big valley, as you look up into the park, and the wind comes over the Rocky Mountains and it comes down into that valley, which is essentially like a wind tunnel. And it comes blowing up that valley and it ends up on my deck. So we've had like 30 and 40 mile an hour winds consistently for the last week, with some nights where we've had 80 and 84 mile an hour gusts. And when it's, 5 degrees outside or 5 below zero, it's cold as hell.
I could only imagine. I was going to ask you, what's the wind chill factor when you put that in there?
We've had some days, I think, where it's, 20, 30 below with wind chill, but you just don't go out.
Yeah, right.
If you do go out, you're all covered up, you can't have any exposed skin and you get frostbite within about 6 minutes. So you just kind of cover up and run.
That's all you got to do.
That's all your truck.
Right? Holy shit. Well, so I just listened to a good part of the 83 weeks you did with Conrad about Vern Gagne. And I was surprised to hear that you lived in Pittsburgh. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I did. I lived in, just for a short period of time, about 2, 3, maybe 3 years, not quite. I lived in a suburb of Pittsburgh called Penn Hills.
Yes. Mm-hmm. My brother lives up there, actually, in that area.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Like Gibsonia kind of area, kind of like that. So
yeah, I went to Seneca Junior High School and John H. Linton Intermediate in Penn Hills. And I left Penn Hills before I went to Penn Hills High School.
Penn Hills. Oh, okay. My mom went to Seneca Valley High School there. So yeah, that's pretty awesome. No, I was like, wow, Bischoff lived in Pittsburgh? I was like, that's crazy. So, but what I did want to ask about too is, I also was interested in knowing too that you did like Greco-Roman and things like that, and you tied that in with how you eventually met Vern. Was that a big connection point for you and Vern? Was the amateur wrestling background? Because I know that was a big thing for him too, getting wrestlers into the business like that. Correct?
Well, not only getting amateur wrestlers into the professional wrestling industry, but Vern, he himself was an amazing amateur wrestler. I think he was a 2-time NCAA wrestling champion at the University of Minnesota, and I believe he made the Olympic team.
Yeah.
So Vern, and because of his background in amateur wrestling, he supported it in a big, big way in Minnesota long before amateur wrestling, was cool. It's gotten a lot cooler now because of MMA and because so many top, MMA guys come from, an amateur wrestling background. Brock Lesnar being a great example. So it's a lot cooler now than it used to be. But yeah, Vern was a big supporter of amateur wrestling, and to a degree, to answer your question, it was the entry point, if you will, of our relationship. For me, I leveraged my amateur wrestling background and relationship in the same area that Vern went to high school. I leveraged that to get my first meeting with Vern.
Yeah, and then it was through Mr. Shields you got the connection into the AWA, and then I thought that was a neat little story too. How your first ever thing was like you just called him up and was like, hey, I want to promote this amateur wrestling event going on against Sweden. We're doing that AAU thing. And I thought that was what a neat way to get into the business kind of deal.
Yeah, but and because it was Vern, and I didn't know Vern Gagne. I had an impression of Vern Gagne, as being a wrestling fan, but also seeing a lot of what Vern did in the community, supporting not only amateur wrestling, but the football program at the University of Minnesota. Obviously, I think he went to college with Bud Grant, who was the head coach of the Minnesota Vikings back when I lived there, back when the Vikings were actually good.
Yeah. It's been a while.
And Vern and Bud had a great relationship. They were close friends. And between the two of them, one or the other, or generally both, were in the, sports headlines, or at least on the sports page, 2 or 3 times a month because of their association with, fundraising events and things like that for the athletic, departments of different schools.
Yeah. And it's such a cool way to like those AWA ties, I think is so fascinating. And even Conrad getting the background about like the office environment and everything like that. Something that you mentioned too during it was you took time to like learn about production and stuff like that. You said in your spare time while working for AWA. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Sure, Dominic. Well, my day job, if you will, was sales and syndication.
Oh, lost you here. Let's see.
Or in his case, bartered to various independent television stations all throughout the Midwest.
Mm-hmm.
And my job was to take that program and try to expand that local television network, thereby giving Vern more opportunities to promote live events in more markets because he had local television to support it.
Right.
So that was my day job. And it involved, travel throughout the Midwest about once a month. Usually I'd go out on the road for a few days at a time. But for the rest of the time, I was in the office working the phone, like most sales jobs. Now, in the evenings is when, once my day job was over and all the program directors and general managers that I would normally be cold calling in some cases, once they all went home to the wife and kids, or the husband and kids, whichever the case, back then it was the wife and kids.
Yeah.
Then I was off duty. There was no one to call. There was nothing to do really. So I would go into the backstage or the, production area, post-production area. And there was a guy there by the name of Joe Chupik, Polish Joe. Love you, Polish Joe. Know you listen. And Joe was like the Kevin Dunn, if you will, of the AWA.
Mm-hmm.
He just did everything. So I would go in and sit with him at night, and he would show, I asked him, I said, show me how this works. Show me how you edit, show me how you mix audio. Show me how you dub those tapes. Dubbing tapes means duplicate tapes, so that you can send them out to all the different, local stations that carry your show. So I I wanted to learn every aspect of the television business. It is my nature. I couldn't really use a microwave until I could figure out how it actually worked. Not that I was afraid of it.
Yeah.
I wasn't afraid of a microwave, but it just drove me batshit crazy that I could put a frozen pizza in a microwave, press a button, and 6 minutes later, it would come out cooked.
How the hell did that happen?
I'm the kind of person that has to know, how the hell does that happen? And until I know, I can't enjoy said pizza. I won't eat the thing until I know how it got cooked. It's just me. And as a kid growing up in the 60s, watching television was fascinating to me. How does it work? How do they get little people on my flat screen
behind it?
How does it work?
Yeah.
So when I finally got the opportunity to learn the very fundamentals of how it worked, I was like a kid in a candy store.
It's like such a fascinating business. Like I did broadcast when I was in college and stuff, but like knowing all the ins and outs, it's like there's so much to come into it. And something that you mentioned too was you were saying like how you get just super excited and you believe like when you're able to like make those calls, like for example, the Vern and stuff like that, when you like called him up and you just were like, you're like, hey, it could happen, and like you had believe in that. And like, where do you say you got that kind of mentality of being like, like just that optimism of like going into it and just believing that maybe something like that can come to fruition and stuff like that. I find that to happen a lot for me. So I'm kind of a dreamer in a lot of ways. So I don't know, is there a certain moment that you kind of feel that maybe stood out to you that maybe was that moment for you?
No, I'll be honest. Throughout the majority of my life, that attitude that I've had my whole life and still do was I was discouraged from it.
Yeah.
I don't know where it came from. I think a lot of it's just genetics, timing, people you meet are influenced by. Sometimes you don't even know you're being influenced by them, but you are, or you don't know you're really being impressed, but subconsciously they're making a big impression. I'm
Yeah.
sure there was a lot of that in my life as a kid growing up, because I was surrounded by some pretty cool people. But for the majority of my life, it's like, well, why can't you just focus on one thing? You know, why do you have to, why do you think you can do that? Why don't you just do this instead?
Yeah.
You know, and I think, and again, you know, gotta be careful how I say that because it sounds bad. But you know, we're talking about the 60s. It was a different culture, it was a different world. The business, the work opportunities, the ability to feed your families, and your ability to carve out a career. It was a whole different world then than it is now.
Right.
And I think the influence, the resistance I got to my I can do anything kind of attitude was really more people were, you know, concerned about me as a young boy, because it was like, God, this kid thinks he can do this, and then he thinks he can do that, and then he's all over the place. He needs help. What's wrong? This is before ADD was a thing.
Right. Or anything is like diagnosed.
Now it's like cool to have ADD. Well, it's
yeah,
not.
right.
I'm
I'm all
making
over
fun
the
of it.
grid.
But you would not believe how many people that I work with in the entertainment industry at the highest levels are ADD.
Yeah.
It's because they get bored quick. So they explore things and they pursue things. And yeah, it's a problem because it's hard to focus and it's hard to follow through. And I'm not suggesting I'm ADD, because I'm not. I'm just, by nature, I think I can do anything that I get excited about.
Right. Yeah. And you know, it's just like that willingness to just be like, okay, hey, Lou, this didn't interest me. I want to learn about that and go into that. I think that just opens up doors for creativity. And I think that's conveyed not only through your AWA days, but WCW and then into WWE and just any other ventures that you've done too.
And you know what else it is, Derek? It's not just the feeling that you can do anything. A big part for me, I'm just speaking for myself.
Yeah.
I'm not speaking in the general sense.
Sure.
I'm not trying to convince anybody to be nuts like me. But part of there's two components of that trait. One is just, you called yourself a dreamer. I was too.
Yeah.
I wanted big things, not necessarily financially, but I just like big moments in my life and big things and big opportunities. I love the energy that comes with that. But I also have absolutely no fear of failure. Zero fear of failure. I never have. In any way, shape, or form. Failure in any way, shape, or form has never frightened me. And I think you can't really be successful being a dreamer if you're also afraid to fail.
Right.
But if you have that unique ability or that body chemistry or DNA chemistry or God's gift or whatever you want to call it, where you dream big and you're not afraid to fail, the odds are you're going to probably be okay.
Yeah, odds are. Yeah. And it's a matter of trying too. Like if you try, then you're going to fail. But is that necessarily failing even if you do fail? Like
that's another thing. I very seldom use the word fail. When I do it, I use it in the context of a discussion like this, because most people think in terms of failure being a negative thing.
Yes.
I trust me, I've experienced enough failure in my life that I prefer not to visit it on a regular basis.
Yeah.
It's not like I enjoy it. All right. But I also don't look at it as failure the way most people do. I look at it whenever, you know, the last business I tried to launch, and it was a mess. We're talking millions of dollars, and it was a big business of real, you know, personal money, not, you know, a bank loan. And it didn't work out. Now, it was in some respects, in many respects, devastating from a financial point of view. But once I kind of reconciled that, and I knew that going in, I knew the risk was there. So it wasn't like it surprised me.
Sure.
I was prepared to take the risk. But when I was all done with it, it was like, okay, now what do I know now that I didn't know when I start this? What did I get out of it? Where's the value in this effort? And if you're smart enough to go, oh, if you really analyze it afterwards, instead of just going and getting drunk and falling down in a gutter somewhere and being miserable,
right,
or feeling like a failure, being embarrassed to talk about it, if you go, okay, let's do an autopsy. Okay, this project is now dead. Let's figure out why it died. And the figuring out how and why a project dies is sometimes more revealing and valuable than being successful. You
100%.
can really extract a lot of value out of a experience that doesn't go the way you want it to, or a failure.
100%. And like, even at the bare minimum, if you like quote unquote fail, or like it doesn't work out, then you know at least you go into that big venture and it happened, and you know that the outcome, you're capable of handling it. That's the bare minimum, I feel, too. It's just like,
Well, and that's the part of not having any fear. And I use this term or phrase, I should say, all the time, and I get my balls busted on social media for doing it because it sounds so simplistic and almost childish. But it's something I tell myself every day. Every time I'm faced with a new opportunity or a new challenge of any kind, that matters, first thing I say to myself in my head is, okay, know what you don't know. Before you make a decision, before you make a commitment, before you make a judgment, make sure you know everything you need to know.
Yeah.
I start my day with, okay, know what I know. I need to know what I don't know today.
Yeah.
And that also, for me, that's just a little mind game I play with myself, but it also sets me up for the day because it kind of keeps you open-minded.
Yeah.
As opposed to going, nah, I know everything I need to know. I'm just moving like this.
I'm good. I got my lane. Yeah. It's more like, yeah, open-minded kind of thing is a big thing. It's a very big thing. As far as
this sounds like an episode of like Phil Donahue.
I know, right?
Or not Phil Donahue. That's like 100 years ago. Dr. Phil. That's what I meant.
Dr. Phil. I knew Phil though. I knew Phil, both Phils. Well, let's go from just like your favorite like moment, I guess, coming into is there a certain time period from AWA to WCW? Like, so a lot of people, like mass population of wrestling fans, would say, hey, this probably was his favorite time was WCW. But does AWA stick out for you more so as like sort of rewarding in a lot of ways? You mentioned like knowing Wahoo McDaniels and Ray Stevens and how those times were like so good to you and stuff like that during that episode of the podcast. Is there a certain moment that really is a big highlight for you as far as from your wrestling career standpoint?
You know, there's beats in my life.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there wasn't like in-ring moments or things like that stand out in my mind. And I go, wow, I'm so happy I got to do that.
Right.
There was many of those, right? I mean, too many to count, really.
Yeah.
But when it's like, when I'm, you know, sitting out on the deck with a cold beer in the summertime, looking out over the mountains and kind of taking stock of what I've done and what I want to do, because I'm by no means retired at this point in my life. I'm probably more active now than I've been in the last 20 years. But when I sit back and just go, okay, let's do a little inventory check. What have we done so far? What was the most important? What do I reminisce about sometimes? And for me, within the context of that conversation relating to my wrestling career, when I first started working for AWA, that was a very special time for me. Magical might be a little over the top, but it was really, really special for me because I was doing something that I was so passionate about, and there was so much to learn, and I related to the product. I didn't know anything about the business of the wrestling business, but I related to it as a fan. And I always looked at it as I got older. I'm talking about when I was in my 20s and when my wife and I first met before we got married. Sunday I had to sit at home and watch wrestling. She was like, why? And at the time I was like a regional sales manager for a heavy equipment, agricultural manufacturer. So it's not like I was digging a ditch somewhere.
Right.
And I said, honey, this is the purest form of marketing that I know of. Now, I knew what I meant. I said it incorrectly. It's the purest form of psychology that you can find on television.
Yeah.
It's raw, it's kind of crude and basic and fundamental, but it's also, because of that, sometimes the most compelling and interesting to me, especially back then. And I remember that first gig I got, the AWA, was going from doing something. I was a good sales manager. I could hire and train and develop salespeople, and I was very successful at that, relatively speaking. But I wasn't passionate about it. I just happened to be decent at it. It was paying the bills. But then I moved over to the AWA opportunity, and now all of a sudden I was doing something that I was inherently good at, which was sales. But I was also passionate about and I get to learn about how that little box works.
Right. That's the big thing. 100%. No, I think it's just to that point of being like the psychology, like the purest form of psychology is so true too. There's just so much like the little aspects of wrestling you can tie into anything of life. I feel like I'm like, well, that's kind of wrestling in a lot of ways. Like whether it's just everyday life or interacting with people, it's so much like that you find. Yeah.
Well, it can be, it's, and now I'm going to sound like one of those old guys is, wrestling should be like it was back in the day. I'm not that guy. I'm not that guy, but I will tell you that as athleticism, and this is all driven by the fact that wrestling has become much more of a television property than it was a live event property.
Right.
Back in Vern's day, wrestling was nothing but a live event property. And the only reason you did television is to sell tickets at the live event. It was a lost leader. It was a freaking infomercial is what it really was.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, as time has evolved, the industry has evolved and television has evolved. Now, in the case of WWE, for example, one of their largest revenue streams is getting paid for their television show. And because of COVID, not by choice, but by design. However, I predicted right here on WrestleZone.
You did. But
no,
my buddy
I'm making a prediction right now.
Oh, okay.
After COVID is over, I predict right here that the WWE nor AEW will emphasize the live event side of their business. They'll do live events. Probably this is more directed towards WWE, where WWE they were passionate about driving. They were doing 250, 300 live events a year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It ain't happening because number one, it's tougher. Live events are tougher for a lot of reasons. Number two, the margins in live events are slim, and they're making the majority of their money off of television. Why risk people getting hurt? Why build that live event infrastructure that is so fickle to begin with, and the margins are so slim now that WWE has proven, and they've modified their business model because of COVID, where the majority of their money is coming in from television. They don't have to take that live event risk any longer. So I think the live event touring model that we were familiar with in WWE, in my prediction, not talking to anybody there, don't have any inside information, not pretending I do.
Yep.
I predict as a result of COVID, you're going to see a business model from WWE that doesn't look anything like it did pre-COVID with regard to live events. And AEW wasn't really in the live event business. They had just gotten out the door and kicked off their TV show and were probably gearing up for it when COVID hit. They're probably reconsidering that as we speak.
Absolutely.
I would guess.
Yeah, I would think so too. And, from that standpoint of WWE too, do you think this is all speculation, obviously, but like, do you think that they're going to go from a more like shorter, they'll go to places, they'll travel around, I'm sure, but do you think it's just going to be more condensed, like in regards to where more selective? Maybe
I think television will tour.
Mm-hmm.
Because you need a lot, as we know now, after a year of COVID, we need people in the seats.
Very key.
Real live people throwing shit at each other, really being there with a sign, not kind of in some digital representation thereof. Yeah. I want to see I want to see a body breathing.
Yeah.
Right.
Key.
I don't care what they look like. I don't care if they're funny. I don't care if they dress well. I just want to see a breathing body in a building.
It's all we ask.
Desperate for it. I have to have it. But
please.
But so television will tour. Obviously, pay-per-views will tour. You will see some I'm guessing you'll see some big, larger markets where you're almost sure, because of strong TV and just a dense population, where you're going to do pretty well. You'll see live events, but I think the days of the tours in small B towns, C towns, D towns, gone.
Out of here. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could definitely see that too, especially, like more so even with WWE, but like you were even saying too, like AEW wasn't really necessarily a traveling wrestling company in the first place in a lot of ways. So yeah, I think too, what I was thinking too is you did an interview with us probably like in 2019, I want to say, and you mentioned the aspect of streaming and what a development all this has been, like, since COVID and everything like that, from like WWE going to Peacock to just the other opportunities, the doors opening for like different smaller wrestling promotions going into the streaming service and stuff like that. Overall, how do you feel now? This is pretty broad, but how do you feel about it being like, do you think this is going to be a very positive outcome for wrestling? Specifically, I guess. I mean, it's kind of unknown, I feel, for sports in general, but from a wrestling standpoint, how do you feel about just it going to the streaming service and the new kind of wave of how people consume television or media, so to speak?
So the question is, how do I think streaming is going to affect the business in a large sense?
In a macro sense, yeah.
Well, I think it's going to be good. Look, the more eyeballs you have on the product, the more people connect to the product, whether they're connecting to it on their phone or they're connecting to it on their computer, on their desk, as you and I are right now,
right?
Whether they're talking about it on a podcast like 83 Weeks, or they're part of a platform like adfreeshows.com, or they get their television from Hulu or Peacock or an app. It doesn't matter as long as they're connecting to the product. Then you'll be able to market to them somehow, way, shape, or form. The challenge. So the short answer is yes. I think the more media and the more ways people can get their hands easily on that media, the better.
Right.
Now, here's the flip side. It becomes more crowded. If you and I were to have launched a YouTube show about wrestling 7 years ago, you and I would be doing said show from a beach in either your mansion or mine, right, in Hawaii.
Yeah.
Right?
Definitely not Pittsburgh.
No. So now, because there's more content, there's more things to get, there's more bright, shiny objects to get your attention. But if you consistently keep putting out great product and marketing your product and doing the things that you would have to do anyway, and you've always done if you were successful in television pre-streaming, eventually you're going to get there. You'll figure it out. We'll all adapt. Everybody does. Smart people do.
Right? That's how it goes. No, it's very true. And I like you being in the business from the AWA days till up to like even now, so to speak. Yeah, and like knowing the ins and outs of the ratings and being all invested into that stuff and knowing how it's I thought it was a worthwhile question to ask. And from that standpoint too, I was reading some news about how like Nielsen is dropping some of the aspect of how they substantiate ratings. I think like NBC and all those guys I think are kind of going in. It's just a fascinating, crazy. It's moving.
No, what it is, it's a shell game. It's semantics. So it's like politics.
Okay.
I mean, they start just changing the definitions of words.
Okay, yeah.
And that's what politicians do. They take a word that sounds really cool that everybody likes, and then they morph it into a policy or a discussion that's actually not that great. And all of a sudden it feels okay because they're using this term that everybody's comfortable with. Nielsen, in my opinion,
no, I'm interested. I'm very interested.
They're not necessarily changing words, but they're changing formulas.
Oh, okay.
We're no longer going to talk about ratings anymore. We're going to talk about viewers. That happened 10 years ago, 12 years ago. We're going to transition away from a discussion about ratings and share, which was for many, since the beginning of television time, was the barometer by which the advertising community spent all of their money and made all of their decisions.
Yeah.
But once that didn't work out so well anymore, because those numbers weren't looking very good year over year, they went, let's not talk about that. We have a new methodology. We're talking about viewers, total viewers. Okay. And then they break that down and look, it maybe their intentions are good and they're trying to be more specific. I ain't buying that bullshit. The entire advertising world is focused on Nielsen, and they're the kingmakers, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So whenever there's a change in formula or an adaptation to a new business model, I'm always anxious about it and I'm always optimistic about it, but I don't buy it hook, line, and sinker either. So color me skeptical.
That's good. Good sense to have skepticism for sure, especially when it comes to all that. Yeah, you're right though. It's like it's very political and that kind of thing. And
Oh, it's voodoo, brother.
right?
If someone came into your studio right now and put a gun to your head, God forbid, I'm not suggesting this happen. I don't even know where you live, so come on.
It's okay.
But let's just say some Nielsen executive came in and said, "All right, Dominic, here's what we're going to do. You're going to explain to me how Nielsen aggregates their ratings. How do they get, you're going to explain to me how Nielsen works. And you got about a minute before I pull the trigger. What's the first thing out of your mouth?
Don't kill me because I don't know.
Nobody does. Certain people think they do.
Yeah.
But I think they've bamboozled. They've been bamboozled. They think they know, but they don't. I think it's all voodoo. It's a good guess. That's what it is.
Yeah.
It's a semi-educated guess.
It's crazy. Oh man, it is like a lot of the times, like I just look at the numbers. I'm like, okay, this means something. I'm gonna write about it, but
yeah, we're gonna write about it. We're gonna make sure it sounds important. I'm not busting your balls here, Dominic. I'm not blaming you. But
that's okay.
On, you know who I'm talking about.
I get it. I get it.
I'm gonna get a click. Oh my gosh, this company got 2,000 more viewers than that company. Oh my God, this is going to change the business. It's a headline all of a sudden. Click.
Oh, hey, well, yeah. Holy shit. 100%.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. Listen, it's people really do focus on it a little too much. And I'm just like, it's, you know, people are watching it. It's being consumed. Maybe not the level it used to be, but hey, it's gonna, you know, that's just the nature of people watching media. Their life. Exactly.
Who would have imagined? Okay, I'm a lot older than you. I can tell by looking at you. I don't even need to ask you how old you are, but I cannot imagine in my television lifetime over the last 30 some odd years, professionally, that there would be a time when a NBC primetime television show only delivered 2 or 3 million viewers. That's crazy. Cable 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And now network television, here's another prediction. And this is like some really serious macro stuff. I'm flying around looking down at everything all of a sudden. But I kind of suspect that streaming is going to become network, right? Cable is going to become streaming, and network is going to become what cable was in the 70s. It's going to be ancillary revenue.
Yeah.
It's just not going to be, it's going to be the third player in a 3-tier system.
Yeah. I could totally.
Streaming's 1, cable's going to be 2, and network's going to be 3.
Yeah.
And that was exactly the opposite, 5 years ago?
Right. How quick has that moved? It's just wild.
Fun ride. I'm glad I'm not in that business.
I know. I don't blame you, Eric. I don't blame you.
But it's fun to watch from the sidelines.
Yeah, right. Just to be an observer. There you go.
There's television cable, there's cable outlets crashing and burning, there's production studios blowing up in Hollywood. You know, the entire industry is changing all around us, but hey, I can get my stuff on my phone. So I know I
can watch this movie coming out on HBO Max here in like 2 weeks. I don't gotta leave my home.
Well, yeah, that's another big deal.
How nuts is that? Oh my God, it's just insane. Yeah. Let's see. Oh yeah, something I'd really like too about your conversation was like not wanting to know the magic of wrestling when you like were in AWA and stuff like that, and like, you know, showing how like the meat's cooked essentially, and like you kind of appreciated Vern not having you in those meetings and stuff like that. When you were doing that in WCW and then like being in the creative hands, did it kind of spoil some of it for you, like what your expectations were when you were in AWA? It was like, oh, I kind of like the magic and the allure. Did it kind of spoil it when you ended up getting into the creative process, or did you find yourself more so appreciating it?
Well, that's a great question. And it was a little bit of both, to be honest. Here's, you know, a parallel, I guess, an analogy. If you love going to David Copperfield or any magician, you just love, you know that it's not real, you know, he's not really pulling a rabbit out of his ass, whatever. Okay. It's a magic trick, but you don't know how it's done. And you go to be entertained by the fact that you don't know how it's done. And you're amazed by that. That's the feeling of it. It's like, wow, how did he do that?
Yeah.
Right. That's the rush that you should get if you go to a good magic show. Now, once you learn how it's done, you can't enjoy it the same way unless there is another aspect of a magic show that you're even more interested in now because you know a little bit more. So in my case, once, I moved into management at WCW and as an executive, I was no longer enjoying God, how they do that aspect of things as a fan would, but I was focused more on, wow, what if we did this instead? What if we did that? The opportunity to kind of create that illusion was more interesting to me than watching the illusion being played out, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah. No, that totally makes
absolutely. Instead of watching the magician, I wanted to be the magician.
Be the magician and see what the effects would be. That's great too. I tell you what, you were selling me and my brother when we were watching it when we were kids. I was just like, oh, like there was so many lines that were blurred for me. I was like, wow, do they really, like, it was just so much like, this is stuff I've never seen before in wrestling. And is this real? What's going on? So it was working. It was working. Yeah, I'll close it out with some of this here. As far as overall with, like from a creative aspect, you're still doing like ad-free shows and everything in that regard. How are you getting more of that creative itch when it comes like, and you want to like kind of, you were talking about still being in the business and everything like that. How are you kind of scratching that itch at this moment in time? And is there like thoughts of like, not necessarily like doing what you've done before, but like any aspect into the business that you'd be more interested in dabbling into at some point in time?
There is, yes and no. I mean, as you may have read about in these headlines are old, a year or two old, but I'm, involved in a feature film for Netflix.
Right. Yes.
Working with Todd Phillips, who directed The Joker, and Scott Silver, who co-wrote The Joker. Chris Hemsworth is attached to play Hulk Hogan. So that's a hell of an opportunity, and I love being a fly on the wall. When I'm in a room full of really successful, talented people, I'm really happy just to be the fly on the wall because you can learn a lot. You can gain so much insight just because of your proximity. Sometimes you can, not that I'll have any aspirations to go out and direct a movie or even write a movie, but you learn about how the pieces come together and just so many little aspects of things that you may not have ever been exposed to before. I've been producing television, wrestling, and otherwise for over 30 years. There's nothing really that new about television, or I don't feel that there is, at least not new enough or exciting enough for me to go, wow, I think I'm going to get back into TV. But the opportunity to do a feature film, especially at the level that I'm doing it at, is like, wow, what a gift. So I'm excited about that. I'm working with Conrad Thompson on a number of other different things, which will be announced at some point. But, adfreeshows.com is great for me. It's probably one of the most fun things I do every week. Interacting with I call them family members. Some people call them fans or subscribers, but not me. They're family members because I spend so much time interacting with them, either calling them on the phone and, riffing with them or doing live Zoom chats, that I feel like I have extended family all over the world.
Yeah.
I've got more friends in the UK right now than I do in Wyoming. And I live here.
Yeah.
And it's all because of adfreeshows.com. So that's fun for me. I have no desire or interest in, on a day-to-day basis, getting back in the wrestling business, not because I don't respect them. I can't express how grateful I am for what I've been able to experience as a result of the industry. But I've been there and I've done that, and it's in my rearview mirror now, and I respect it. And I like to put my toe in the water every once in a while.
Yeah.
Just if I get a call from AEW, God, yeah, that's cool. If I get a call from WWE, that's cool. But if I had to go, every single week or, not so much, because it's just not new enough for me.
That's a great way to put it too, because I could only imagine being 30 years in the business, you've kind of done it all. So it's just like, from being an on-air character and from not only that, but production, everything. So it's just like, yeah, if nothing in television has necessarily changed, there's not a huge incentive to like, okay, I got to get back into it. It's not.
No, the only reason I would get, the only incentive, if it were one, it's not for me, is money.
Yeah, right.
And I need money. I'm not independently wealthy, but there are other ways that can interest me more and excite me more than doing something that I've been doing for 30 some odd years.
Right. No, I think the feature film aspect of things, it is a new venture, and it's got to be pretty cool. And seeing how all that plays out will be very interesting too down the road.
Well, I'll let you know when it happens. Right now, everybody's on hold because of COVID. Like everything's ready to go, but how the hell are we going to make a movie when we can't put 12 people in a room?
Right. That's the tough thing.
You can't even have Thanksgiving with your grandmother, for crying out loud. How are we going to produce a movie?
It's so tough. No, it's true. I think, and Eric too, from an outsider perspective, I have had free shows, but seeing it seems like a very cathartic release for you to kind of like just interact with fans and being having that kind of positive environment, and like just seeing that is like, it's very rewarding to see from an outsider's perspective too. Let me just say that.
You know what? And I know you're probably running short on time, and I know I talk a lot, and I apologize.
No, that's fine. I'm here. I got a shift after this, so I'm good. So you're fine.
But I don't want to understate. You hit it right on the head. Cathartic.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about that just for a minute.
Go for it. Absolutely.
When Conrad first approached me about doing a podcast, or I think we approached each other. It wasn't like he was pursuing me. You know, he had a successful show with Bruce. I was very close with Bruce. I had met Conrad a year before he and I ever talked about doing a podcast together. But when Conrad and I first started talking about the possibility of doing one together, I was pretty reluctant. You know, number one, because I had tried it once and it wasn't really that successful, just for a variety of reasons. Bad format, chemistry wasn't quite right, bad timing, whatever.
Just happens.
And I kind of went, you know what, I'm going to put that on hold. I called it a hiatus in my mind. I was done with it, but I just want to take a couple months off and decide if I wanted to continue and really try to figure out what I needed to do to make it more successful, because it wasn't successful by my standards. Mm-hmm. And then that's when Conrad came in. And when Conrad and I first started talking, I was like, yeah, I don't know, Conrad. You know, Conrad had a clear idea what he wanted to do. He had a picture, and he wanted a podcast about the Monday Night Wars. Basically is what he told me. Now, Conrad, man, people have been talking about that forever. There's been documentaries, there's been books, there's been, I don't know, 500,000 shoot interviews.
How many?
I mean, come on, it's over, it's done, nobody cares. And Conrad said, no, you're wrong. They do care, and they're interested. There's a market, and I've got the format, so I think we can be successful. We should give it a try. And so it went something along those lines. And I said, okay, well, let's do it. And if it's fun and it works, we'll keep doing it. If it's not fun, we won't. It's really that simple.
Yeah,
right?
That's it.
So, and here's where it got cathartic for me. And this is why I wanted to bring this up, because the first couple of months, I think, I was listening back to some of the early shows. I was defensive. And I'm not making excuses for myself, because it was a flaw. It was a weakness in my character. But I look back at it now and go, man, what a jagoff. You know what a jagoff is.
I do. I was going to say, I know what a jagoff is.
Most people are right now going, God, did he just call himself a jackoff? No, jagoff. It's a completely different thing. You know it if you from Pittsburgh. But I listened to those shows. God, I was kind of a jagoff. And part of that was because I thought that's what the audience wanted. I was in character. I was being that NWO smarmy, smart ass character to a degree, not 100%, but part of that was
part of it. Yeah.
Because I thought that's what the audience wanted. But the real core of that issue for me was that I've been just getting my ass kicked, in peripheral media, as I refer to it, for so long that I was just like, okay, you want to fight? You want to throw something up? Let's fight. And Conrad would use, quotes from different, newsletters and so forth. And it just, boom, instantaneously, man, that's my reaction. Tuck my chin, put my fists up, and get ready to throw a kick to the head. That's how I live. And after a while, because Conrad's so good, he kind of broke me, and not broke me down, but he got me to drop my guard.
Right.
And just start having conversations instead of answering questions like I was on a
jury
I was in a trial.
Yeah, on trial, exactly.
Yeah. And once that started happening, now I could talk about mistakes I made, bad choices I made, positive choices I made. I could look at the good and the bad and not take either one of them personally.
Right. Yeah.
And once I got to that point where it no longer made me defensive, it started becoming fun. 83 weeks started becoming the most fun thing I did every single week until ad-free shows came along.
Yeah.
Now that's more fun.
Now that's
because
a blast.
I get to interact. You know, the
Yeah.
podcast is me and Conrad. But it's that change in the way I looked at my tenure in the wrestling business and accepted mistakes and accepted criticism, and I was able to do it in an entertaining way, all of a sudden made me go, okay, I don't care. We can make fun of it. I can make more fun of myself than anybody else can.
Right. Yeah.
You know, nobody can have as much fun with my mistakes as me. And if I can make it entertaining and people can have fun listening to it, come on, let's go. And that's how I feel every time I get ready to fire up the mic and do a podcast.
It's gotta be so good. Yeah. It like,
is.
Yeah. Right.
People, honestly, God, I did one this morning. I got up at 4:30 this morning. This morning. It was still dark out. The moon was up. So I could review the show that Conrad and I were going to do at 7:30 in the morning, my time. And I couldn't wait. I went to bed last night excited.
That's when you know you're in a good spot. And you're right. Like Conrad is so good at that stuff. Like just from starting from, I remember the Ric Flair podcast he did, and then going into, with Something Wrestle With and so on and so forth. Anything in StarCast, even that vibe at StarCast, everybody's happy there when people are allowed to be there. But it's just like, it's such a neat environment. Very,
and again, I can't let this opportunity go by without talking about this. That's Conrad.
Yeah.
Conrad, the human being, the individual, is such a positive, generous, and caring person. And I'm saying that I wanted to kill. He's too much bigger than I am. I couldn't have done it at this advanced stage of my life. But there was a time that I wanted to choke him, and I think he was thinking about choking me when I first met him. And that's because I didn't know him. Mm-hmm. But as I got to know Conrad, and then I got to be around Conrad, and this is when I really saw it. It was about 1.5 years ago, when maybe a little longer, whenever Conrad started doing the StarCast, and I looked at the team of people that were there supporting Conrad, and they were really good human. They were hardworking. They were smart. They were kind. They worked their asses off. They were humble. They were just such great people. And I met Dave Silva, and I met Dave Hancock. And I think Dave Silva is one of the most wonderful human beings I've ever met.
Such a nice dude.
As well as his wife and his kids. Yeah. I want to hug him when I see him. They bring tears to my eyes of joy when I see his kids. And Conrad doesn't surround himself. People like that, like Dave Silva, are attracted to someone like Conrad because he's such a powerfully positive person, and they feel better and they function at a higher level. And when I sat back and watched the team that Conrad put around him in his mortgage business at StarCast, adfreeshows.com, it's like, this dude is magic. What he touches, because he's so positive and smart, good combination to be, he attracts a certain level of people, a certain level of human that I want to be around.
Right.
I'll take out the garbage. I don't care.
I'll
not only not go to catering, I'll make catering. I don't care. I just want to be on that team. I want to catch whatever those people have.
It's true. It's true. No, it's such a cool environment, and it's fun. You can tell it's a good time, like just listening to an episode and everything like that. So, Eric, thanks for taking the time, man. It's been awesome. I can't express that enough.
Well, I've had a blast. I hope you've had fun, and I hope, more importantly, the people that listen to this have fun.
I know, right?
You and I entertaining ourselves, and your audience goes, "God, that was a horrible interview."
What the hell were they talking about the whole time? I thought I was in Phil Donahue here.
My apologies. I'll apologize in advance. Oh God, we'll laugh about this over a beer one day.
Absolutely, absolutely. Once we get revved back up. So,
all right, man.
Thanks, everybody.